So, Maximian, what do you think of him, Byron?
I think he's a bad emperor.
I would feel sorry for him, but no, I don't. So, I mean, at the beginning of Diocletian's reign, he is quite effective in dealing with the Bagaudae, who are a large group of bandits in Gaul who had rebelled, I think, just against the Roman Empire in a way, because they were just out to look after themselves, because emperors to really watch over Gaul, which might give you an idea of the character of Quirinus. Immediately after Quirinus is dead, or maybe even a little bit before, and so there's a whole school he manages to sort out, which is to his credit, but he fails to invade Britain, and in fact his handling of Carausius is the whole reason for his revolt and the independence of Britain as a rival empire. I think it's also perhaps a little telling that when Constantius is made emperor, he's given Spain, Gaul, and eventually Britain. Maximian is given... No, wait, Constantius is just given Gaul, isn't he? And Britain.
Actually, yes, he gets Spain later when the Augusti abdicate.
But Maximian, he receives Italy, Africa, and a little bit along the upper Danube. So he isn't really given a major frontier to protect, which I do wonder if Diocletian has appointed someone more militarily capable in the west, because he has two major frontiers to defend: the Rhine, which has quite a lot of troops stationed on it, and eventually Britain, which also has huge numbers deployed there. The Rhine and Britain, definitely in the Principate, roughly had the same number of troops deployed there. So he's given a lot of responsibility, whereas Maximian is kind of shunted to the side a little bit to look after the civilian provinces.
He actually, yeah, I mean, it's interesting that he doesn't actually lead really many campaigns at all after Constantius becomes Caesar. The only campaign against a foreign enemy is an African campaign in the late 290s when he was dealing with the Quinquegentiani, a Moorish coalition. It didn't, for example, earn him a victory title. And I suppose there isn't a precedent for actually earning, a Mauricus, as a victory title, but it doesn't seem to have been the most significant of victories. And he otherwise spent a lot of his time after Constantius was made Caesar based in Milan or Aquileia in northern Italy, not doing much that has made its way into the sources.
I mean, perhaps you could say, just arguing from silence, that he is spending that time enacting Diocletian's reforms in those provinces of Italy, which are important provinces in a civilian sense. They are more, it's like Africa is the breadbasket of the West. Italy is where Rome is, although none of the Tetrarchs use it as their capital. And also Upper Danube, although quite a small frontier in comparison, is still a very volatile part of the frontier. So perhaps he is spending more time introducing Diocletian's reforms there, but his reign, he does get quite a lot of panegyrics to him, which is quite interesting. There's not really anything that really stands out about his reign.
Yeah, I mean, to me, so his two main positives, I'd say, are his military successes, because he did defeat the Bagaudae, and he also there were Heruli and another tribe. I think there's 4 different tribes actually in 285, 286 who invaded Gaul, and they were probably part of the reason why there were these peasant rebellions. Was the German invasions had flared up again, perhaps exploiting the civil war between Diocletian and Quirinus. Since Aurelian's overthrow of the Gallic Empire, it's possibly the case that Probus was still having to deal with the aftermath of how many soldiers were killed as a result of Aurelian's victory at the Catalaunian fields, where he basically, destroyed the Gallic Empire, the Gallic army, and that would have weakened the Rhine frontier, because Aurelian had to deal with that a bit in the last year of his reign as well. And so Gaul is needing an emperor, and the peasant rebellions seem to reflect that, and Carinus spent a good deal of time in Gaul as well, seemingly for that reason. But yes, he does defeat this large series of, this series of Germanic invasions in 285 or 286. He then defeats another invasion, supposedly on the day he entered his first consulship on the 1st of January in 287. Supposedly, there's a whole panegyrical description of how he put on the consular robes and then quickly had to put on the military, paludamentum, because suddenly the Alemanni were invading. And as a result of that, he then actually crossed into Germania and ravaged Alemannia. He also appears to have done a fair bit of divide and conquer. He seems to have been supporting the Burgundians, who were kicking the Alemanni out of their traditional homelands. And so the Alemanni had to move into the Agri Decumates between the upper Rhine and the upper Danube. So he had these successes. As I mentioned, he did have that Moorish campaign later, but he also became much less active militarily once Constantius became Caesar. And yes, perhaps he was playing more of an administrative role, because he presumably had, he was the second in command of the empire, so presumably he did do a fair bit from an administrative perspective. Also, I guess my other point I'd give in his favor is he was, despite only seeing Diocletian on a number of occasions, 3 occasions really, there are 3 known events when Diocletian traveled west and met up with Maximian. He was clearly very loyal to Diocletian. I mean, he agreed to abdicate, well, despite there being no precedent for that. I mean, the only precedent we have is Tetrarchy, and that was in the context of a civil war, his impending doom as Aurelian was approaching. So he clearly needed help getting rid of Carausius, that he tried this. We know from the panegyric of 289 that he was preparing this fleet on the inland rivers of Gaul with the intention of contesting control of the English Channel and invading Britain. And then the panegyric of 291, there is radio silence about what happened there. And then 2 years after that, Constantius is made Caesar, and then he immediately marches against Carausius's possessions in Gaul, because Carausius has managed to reassert himself in Gaul. We know from other literary accounts that Carausius was clearly doing quite well militarily.
I think if you were to end Maximian's career there in 305, I'd probably put him in decent. But he comes back and makes a lot of trouble for a lot of people. So he's partially responsible for the death of the future emperor Severus II, helps his troops defect to Maxentius, his son, and then eventually turns on his own son Maxentius, and then flees to Constantine, who he also betrays, and eventually Constantine gets sick of him trying to murder him, so he forces him to commit suicide after besieging Massalia, where he's holed up.
Exactly. He would have been a fine emperor if he had abdicated in 305, and that was that.
Yeah.
But his last 5 years of existence, for me, almost undo it all, because it's just such a sad odyssey of political failure and impiety. Maxentius takes power in Rome and invites his father to help him, and, I guess understandably, he helps his son. And if that was what was going on, if he was helping his son because he understood that, well, if my son gets defeated by Galerius and Severus II, he's going to be killed, that would make sense to me. I could forgive that.
But he uses it as a route to regain power.
Yeah, he turns against his own son. He tries to overthrow Maxentius. And so at that point, he's very difficult to sympathize with that for me. Like, that is...
I believe the technical term is a git.
Right.
He's not the most pleasant character after he abdicates.
he's challenging Galerius as the supreme, the senior ranking emperor. That seems to be his real game. He wants to be the head of the imperial college now that Diocletian has abdicated. Obviously, Galerius isn't going to accept that because, Diocletian told him he could be, this is his imperial college now. And he's overthrown Severus II, who is then executed by Maxentius. Yeah, there's this whole scene where he accuses Maxentius of essentially, a disastrous emperor for Italy and for Rome in front of the soldiers, the Praetorians, and the other legionaries in Rome. And he tears the purple cloak from Maxentius' shoulders. And Maxentius jumps down to the soldiers for support, jumps off the podium and joins them. And the soldiers are, just they're livid with Maximian for doing this to his own son. Yeah. He clearly was politically outplayed by Maxentius in a big way. And I think, one thing Maxentius did so well was while Maximian was in Gaul trying to win an alliance with, and succeeding in winning an alliance with Constantine, Maxentius was actually defending Rome against Galerius, the defeater of the Persians, and succeeded in defending Rome. And so Maxentius had serious credentials and was able to outplay his father. And then his father, Maximian, then tries to do the same thing to Constantine and quite rightly is forced to commit suicide at that point. It's a depressing last 5 years for him.
Yeah. I feel there is a level of I feel I can't put him in mediocre for his later career. It's such a... I think that's the other thing. He does all of this stuff, but none of it works out for him either.
Yeah, he's not very good at it.
There's a serial failure in terms of the Tetrarchy Game of Thrones.
You would think the army would actually be very loyal to him. And indeed, that's why Maxentius wanted his help in large part, because he knew that Maximian would be a drawing card for the legions under the command of Severus II, because Severus II had basically taken over Maximian's legions. But then Maxentius is able to take those legions from right under Maximian. His son is cleverer than he is, I'd say. Yeah. You can see from the beginning that there's a power struggle between the two of them, because actually Maxentius doesn't take the title of Augustus until it's like 8 months or something. There's an 8-month period between his usurpation and actually taking the title Augustus. And it seems that there's this tension between the two over what they're actually doing. Are they both emperors? Is it just that Maxentius is an emperor and is he being helped by his father? Are they going to be joining the Tetrarchic Imperial College, or are they their own thing? And it seems there's a real... You can kind of see that with the coinage, who they're honoring on the coinage versus who they're honoring as consuls, where, for example, Galerius is absent from the coinage, which is perhaps the influence of Maxentius, whereas Galerius has been honored as consul at the beginning of 307, perhaps Maximian trying to get himself back into the Imperial College. Like, there's all these tensions, and basically it's a political battle that Maximian loses. He attended the conference at Carnuntum where Diocletian briefly returned from retirement in 308 and basically was there to tell Maximian to retire a second time, which Maximian temporarily did. Although, again, that influence of Diocletian on display, that he could even at that point be like, no, you've got to step down. Also Diocletian was there to help Galerius set up Licinius as the new Augustus. I guess it's difficult because I do respect how much Maximian was loyal to Diocletian during those 20 years, because that was a core part of what made the Tetrarchic period a stable period.
Yeah, especially the 280s, where I think that's probably the best part of Maximian's career, because he is doing most of the stuff in the West. I mean, as in the Carausius affair is perhaps the main failure of that part of his reign, but the rest of the 280s is he deals with the Bagaudae. He starts to re-establish control and the administration over Gaul, and starts to implement the policies of Diocletian and restores the frontiers and all the rest of it. And then his passes the baton to Constantius when he takes control. But Yeah, it's really a decline for Maximian after Constantius enters the scene.
Yeah, it's sort of like if 285 to 293 was all we had, I'd say he'd be a good emperor. Like the Crassus thing isn't great, but he's otherwise a good emperor. He then sort of loses a bit of luster during the first Tetrarchy, but then again, as you say, he may well just be more, he's passed the baton on and he's more administratively inclined at that point.
Ancient historians are less interested in the pen rather.
That's certainly true. Eutropius, incidentally, does view him as a bloodthirsty emperor, and there does seem to have been an instance in around 302 or so where we know from an inscription a very prominent senator who had held various positions since the 290s, Helvius Dionysius. He suffered damnatio memoriae. His name was cut out of the crossed out on the inscriptions.
Right.
That might be what Eutropius and also Lactantius refer to when they refer to him as killing senators. Because, I mean, killing senators is a bit of a trope, but Eutropius isn't writing invective, unlike Lactantius. So there may have been some instance where Helvius Dionysius was based in the West. So Maximian did kill at least one senator, possibly with good reason. But that seems to be one of the reasons why Eutropius views him pretty unfavorably.
So you've put him in bad.
I'm thinking so. Maybe Paul would better acknowledge his successful earlier reign.
I'll put him in, I think, incompetent, because the beginning of his reign is good. And
sure,
it is an unfortunate decline for him. Almost his incompetence grows with his age, but I think that's probably most fitting for him. So that's Maximian.